Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ty Smith, and welcome to Designing Your Business Model Utilizing the Business Model Canvas. We'll talk about the Business Model Canvas in a little bit, but I have some thoughts first. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Ty Smith. I'm the principal at a newly found consultancy called Go In LLC, and where we talk about the idea that the world is moving fast, but we can help you move faster. I've spent the last 25 years working with senior level leadership, management in corporate nonprofits, the federal government, helping them engage and solve complex issues because we believe that organizations that are able to adapt the fastest will be the winner. And we hope that we can give you some tools for adaptation. Okay, so every day the world there's a new technology, there's a new threat, there's a new opportunity that comes our way. The question is, how should we respond? Well, I believe that if you respond with speed, urgency, and relentless focus on creating value, you'll be able to do something different and powerful. We must be able, though, to move with swift agility so we can better anticipate and adapt to meet the future needs of our marketplace. And so we've been faced with a huge transitional moment. That's right, the digital transformation, it's years away. We don't have to worry about it. And along comes this thing called COVID-19 that smashed our preconditioned notions about how quickly the change will come. COVID-19 did that for us. But it doesn't have to be the last thing that we all sweat about. You know, their saying goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. As a matter of fact, this came out of Fortune magazine. You know, what led your company to digital transformation? Was it your CEO? Was it your chief technology officer? Or in this case, could it be COVID-19 that makes the difference? As a matter of fact, you know, we know these rates of change. This graph is based on the work done by the late Clay Christensen. And if you ever read the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, this is where this is coming from. And so human adaptation is usually a linear process. But we know that the law of change has gone from 24 months back when they were developing the silica chips, or the transistors, to now every 6 weeks or so. And who would have thought that everybody would have been working from home? Just a few years ago, I was having a conversation just this week about COOP plans and how quickly they have been challenged. You know, because COOP is usually a exercise that we do every year. And the closest we've had in the last 20 years was 9/11. But that was a local. And we went back to the way that we were working. We adapted our current way of doing business to meet a current a current situation. But now we have this line, this blue line, then all of a sudden you have this coronavirus that just makes the acceleration even higher about how do we adapt as human beings. And so we're going to have to think about how our rate of change in technology is being exponential and our capacity as human beings to adapt as being exponential. But here's a pop quiz. Name the company that had a 40% cost overrun for 3 straight years and delivered its products 2 years late. Give you a moment just to think who that company is. Oh, and by the way, it's not a company, it's the federal government. There's a GAO report that came out in, I believe it was 2014 or 2015, that talked about how this works, how we have been driving business that our estimations about cost is a 40%, that we do it for 3 straight years and we deliver products that are 2 years late. As a matter of fact, it's not just us. This is coming from McKinsey about about the commercial sector. Large projects not only fail more often, they deliver less, 50% less on IT, over $15 million. 45% over budget, 7% behind schedule, and 50% less functionality than predicted. So if you go back and you think about this exponential curve about technology and our ability in a straight line, what happens? We would never, ever catch up to where the demands of the market in terms of IT and the capacity for the human being to adapt. But now we're going to have to. We have to adapt. The market is making demands that we adapt. And so one way to think about it is through innovation. So what do we mean by this innovation thing? What do we mean by it? Innovation is not just an idea. Innovation is not just an accelerator. Innovation is not an incubator. Innovation isn't even an organization. Oh, and by the way, if for those of you that might be in the government sector, we have these incubators, we have the accelerators, and those of you that might be in the private sector, you're doing some of the same things. Just having those things, what in the industry we call innovation theater. Look at us, we're doing innovation. We have all these innovative things and we're trusting our people, but that's not enough. As a matter of fact, we believe that you need 5 things. You need a space. You need a space where people can do the innovation. And space isn't just a physical thing. Part of this idea of a innovation theater is, oh, look, we now have couches and we now have whiteboards and we have movable spaces and all those things. But that's not just space. Sometimes it's the mental space. Not sometimes. You need the mental space. It's about having a methodology. You have to have a way of doing it. One of the things that is out there right now, we all heard about design thinking. I am an advocate of the lean startup. There is one member of my team who is the agile guy. He's a former engineer who was always looking for cost schedule performance and saw that maybe that's not good enough. How do we do this agilely? And this is really important, particularly when you have no idea what you're trying to build, that you're just have a notion. The third thing that you need, metrics. You need some way to measure it. Innovation, doing it when you are in a space where you're not exactly going on. You cannot measure innovation the same way you measure a known thing, cost schedule performance. There are a couple of ways to do this. There's pirate metrics, and it's literally called pirate metrics because it's R, A, R. Acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue and referral. How do you measure that? This idea of going from a big set of peoples down to a ongoing resource sustainable idea. TRLs and IRLs, technical readiness levels, innovation readiness levels. There are a couple of other ones that are out there, but this is the work that NASA had done over the last 20 years. How do you get a tier? How do you know when your project is ready? How do you know that it has a life, that it can move from step to step to step? The gates. Innovation accounting. There's a very different way to do accounting when you're doing innovation versus accounting when it all is dollars and cents and how much you're spending, your cost overruns and those things. When you don't know what, you have zero knowledge of whether or not it's going to work, you cannot account for money. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Resources. How do you resource innovation? Having a 5-year plan where you ask for all the money up front, and all of a sudden you get 5 years in and you have no more money, but you have a lot more requirements. Could you think about resourcing your idea more incrementally, more strategically? And I use that word specifically, strategically, knowing that I have an outcome and that I'm looking for some outputs. And finally, I think all of us are struggling with this, culture. How do we support innovation? The purposeful notion that we are moving in the correct direction, that we have the institutional supports, the cultural supports, the social, technical supports to make all of this happen. How do those things go together? How do we treat human beings? Is failure accepted? Is it didn't work a space where you go, wonderful, now we know what not to do? I remember reading an article, I believe it was Fortune magazine or, no, it wasn't Fortune. It was one of the innovation kind of design thinking magazines, popular magazines. And they were talking about Google X, their skunk works. And the guy who was running the Google X came out to see Sergey or one of the guys, one of the founders. So this is quite a while ago. And he goes sheepishly, hey boss, we lost about $600 million. And he said, yeah, did we learn anything? He's like, oh, we learned a lot. He's like, great, now we know what not to do. That is a very different cultural, and that's not just a government thing. In a much longer conversation, if this was that, we would talk about what it looks like in the commercial sector, how the boss, the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion is the thing that runs versus experimenting. Do we have a culture of experimentation? 5 things for innovation. So how would you define innovation? Knowing that's out there. Well, Huffington Post did some work on this about the technology and innovation. They said an invention versus an innovation. An invention is a product that's been created for the first time. You're not even exactly sure if it has any market value whatsoever. But an innovation occurs when somebody takes something and improves on it and makes it even more valuable, a significant contribution. And so think about the iPod. The iPod was an innovation. The MP3 player was an invention. You moved beyond the Discman. We had to take them in and out. You said we can put all these things in one place and you can listen to your songs and you carry this little thing and it charges up. The innovation on Apple's part is they took that, yes, but they made an even bigger contribution. They said, we're not only going to do that, we're going to make your capacity, you don't have to rip CDs anymore and download them. We're going to create an entire ecosystem that all you got to do is pick and choose and we'll download it for you. They made an innovation. They made a significant contribution to that particular market. But we're in a space, not just because of where most of us on this opportunity when we're talking together are dealing the combination of what happens in the commercial sector, what happens in the government sector. When we used to know what threats were like, when they were quantifiable, that was great, but they're not anymore. So how do we deal with that, knowing that this is about innovation and how to create those sustainable business models? The question is, can we innovate by design? Can you actually do it with intention? Because the way that we do that is through speed. That's how we mitigate that possibility, the falling behind. Continuous innovation, adaptation, lean, all those things that we talked about. But it's not just about technology innovation. It's about the speed of innovation in terms of how do we do things? How do we rethink? How do we rethink how we're going to create value? Because most of us look at it like this. Our success looks like I have a great idea and there's a straight line to a game-changing opportunity. Yeah. How often does that work? Because it usually ends up looking like this. We call this a squiggly line of uncertainty. It's all over the place. We have fits and starts and fits and starts and fits and starts. And at some point, that uncertainty kind of gets smaller and smaller. And then we end up with a game-changing idea. That's wonderful. But we want to behave as if it's this, but in reality, it's like this. And so if we had a cultural space where we could deal with this, really deal with the squiggly line, we could get to the game changer and not pretend that we have that. Because it often looks like this. If you were in the classroom with me, I say, what is this? What do you think this is? And you would go, I've heard, it's a computer. I've heard, well, it's a bike. It's something, I don't know, we'll figure it out. But actually, and interestingly enough, those sketches became the Peter B. Lewis building at Case Western University, the Weatherhead School. The architect is Frank Gehry. So those squiggles, that mash of ideas, of uncertainty, became a true building that you could go to if you went to Case Western and visited the Weatherhead School. Because what he offered up is like Einstein. Frank Gehry was the one who said, don't fall in love with your first idea. Albert Einstein, one of the true geniuses in our world, in our lifetime, in modern history. If at first the idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it. What you all are going to have to do as you start to think about the post-COVID-19 environment, what happens as the world is getting smaller, you have to have the absurd idea to have any hope for getting to something that is real. That's why you have to have those 5 hallmarks of a true innovation culture. Remember we had talked about one of the things about how you do spend money? Oh, isn't this interesting? How many of you have experienced this? Give me all the money up front when I'm in my discovery phase. And you know what? I just guarantee, I need a little bit more. I need you to fund that. And so by the time you get to something to scale, there is no more money left. This is risky. And we talk about risk averse. Why would you do something as risky as this? That you fund it all up front with the hopes that by the time you got to execution and scale, that you've done the right thing. Remember, we fund incrementally. Well, here's a little story about an organization that thought they had it right, Webvan. Webvan was one of the second generation, not the first generation, second generation grocery delivery firms. They were out in Silicon Valley, 1996. In 96, they were revolutionizing the online home delivery market. That had already happened, but they really understood it. They weren't the first to market, but they were like the second and a half generation. They were saying, we'll give you a 30-minute window. We'll be there. They raised, and this is very much, they were in San Francisco, but this is very much pre-Silicon Valley .com, $750 million. They had a $4 billion market cap. That is huge in 1996. Nationally owned and operated. They had several distributions. I think there were 4 around the country that they had built up. Automated warehouse. Their infrastructure was sophisticated. They had people who knew the grocery store, the grocery market. They even had consultants and business leaders, to include one of the brothers of the Borders Books and Music, the Border Brothers. I believe he was a Border brother, one of his brothers. So he knew that distribution business. And it went from a sure thing to a catastrophic failure. Between the end of 1999 and mid of July, a year and a half later, they went from a $25 per share down to penny stock. They blew it. Completely blew it. And could not figure out what went, well, we know what went wrong, because there was a after action about, it's called The Anatomy of a .com Failure, the case of an online grocery store, how it all went wrong. My parents, back in the 1980s, loved to go out to the grocery market. That was their date night, even the 1996, in the 1990s. It was a date night. The experience of grocery shopping, they liked. Some people just like to pick their own meats and produce. Menu of ideas, they develop their menu by looking at the store. It's not just tick, tick, tick as I walk through the store. People were confused by the large number of product choices. People like to use coupon, and Webvan only allowed that at the end. And there was many more. And some of you are probably thinking, well, Jesus, there's a lot going on. But the primary thing, where they failed in some ways, is that they forgot the customer. They truly forgot the customer. What market were they going after? They started with the solution and forgot to love the problem. What problem were they trying to solve? As a matter of fact, they ended up in a product death spiral where nobody uses our product. Great. We'll go and ask them what they want. Remember, product first is not solution focused. Nobody's using, well, let's go ask them what the feature missing. We build those and they still don't use it. This is the product death spiral. They had not satisfied the problem, understanding the problem. They went straight to the solution. But what would happen if we were to buy down risk, buy down uncertainty? What would happen if we said, we know nothing up front, but dadgummit, as we pay very little and we reduce the uncertainty by doing discovery, by making sure that we understand the customer's job to be done. And as we got more and more certain, we added more and more money. So by the time we're at the end of the squiggly line of uncertainty, we have cash to spend. That's when we can start to scale it. Instead of trying to make sure that we're buying 5 years worth of activities up front, how about if we buy a month's worth of activity? Do it as cheap as possible to discover and make sure that we were going in the right direction. It could be interesting. Oh, and by the way, as those two intersect, when you get to that inflection point where they intersect, now that's when you know you're onto something. We talk about Pareto's 80-20. Well, at this point, 80% of your uncertainty is probably behind you. Now you just need to certain up and tighten up to make sure that you're getting what is really important. The question is, at that inflection point, what's the value that you're trying to derive? So what is value? Value is the difference between what people say they want and what they really are trying to do. You may have heard the job to be done. And if you haven't, there is I think it's Ted Levitt out of Harvard Business School 30, 40 years ago. He said, people don't want the drill. They want the hole that the drill makes. So if you can get me a hole where I can take my finger and I can stick a hole and I can hang something, great. but you're selling me a drill. Understanding the job that people are trying to do is absolutely important, because then you can figure out the value. Because truly understanding the job to be done could be an outright replacement for the traditional requirements document. Holy smokes. I tell you about my colleague who was an engineer. When he saw this, actually, these are his words. We took his words and said, yeah, this job to be done concept is powerful. If we understood what that meant, we wouldn't need a requirements doctor. It would be an ongoing conversation. It wouldn't be build this, get down the road, and all of a sudden, I didn't want that. Well, that's what you wrote. I'm built what you asked me to do. Otherwise, if they understood the job to be done, the problem to be solved, they could have built the right thing. And this is important for all of us. Your customers are experts on their problems, not their solutions. Requirements document coming from your customer is the solution, not the problem. Our job is to unpack the problem so we can drive the right solution. And so here's a question for you. Why do your customers hire you? Why are they hiring you? Why are they hiring your solution? If you could understand that, you might be in a space where you could create even better products. But asking those very specific questions of why they hire you is powerful. But you got to make sure that you're finding out the real problem. It's kind of like the Jenga blocks. There are several layers of problems to be solved. I could pull the bottom one, or I could pull the top one. But unless I really understand the critical, we call this the idea of a critical assumption, a critical problem to be solved, we might be taking one of the blocks off top and said, great, did it. Meanwhile, the next move could crumble your entire idea. One example of this is Airbnb. I've never had the pleasure of staying in one, but every time we ask this question, people go, it's great. I would say 9 out of 10 people that we ask, they say, great. As you look at this, look over this. Think about each one of those blue dots as a thing that allowed them in their path, those three guys, in their path to become now not just 10 billion. I think the last time it was like $30+ billion valuation. They own nothing. Very little overhead in terms of staff. Their infrastructure is riding on Amazon. And so then they're actually, pre-COVID, which means they're going to have to do some innovation even in their business model. But their prior to COVID-19 business model, what was the most critical assumption that they had to take up? Some people go, they made a website. No. They took pictures. No. They advertised. No. The most critical assumption that they had to overcome, the problem to be solved. Because at this point in 2007, it was the Democratic National Convention in San Francisco. These dudes didn't have enough money to pay their rent, which is the light blue dot, Joe and Brian. They started thinking about it. The question they started asking themselves, could we rent out our air mattress to help pay for our rent? The critical assumption was that people would actually show up and give them money when they didn't need a whole lot of space, when they could not afford a hotel. Oh, by the way, there was no hotels available. Satisfying that critical assumption allowed them to build their business. But what would happen? Remember those intersecting? If they went and did all the flying in and tried to play the same hotel game and build a website and did all this stuff, if they could not prove that critical assumption that was right up front, 2 men and 1 woman would show up and pay them $80 a piece to sleep on the floor, they would have never been able to potentially, or the amount of money that they would have spent trying to prove that they had something would have been tremendous and could have been a waste of money. And so what do you have to be able to do to satisfy that developing business model? There are 3 things, and I really want you to pay attention to this because I think it's important. Desirable, feasible, and viable. Desirability. Do people want, does the market what we have? Do they want what we have? Feasibility. Can we do it? And viability. Should we do it? In other words, is the cost and the cost unit of value, do we get more value than cost to get out of it? Can we extract more value than the cost it takes to build that thing? These are the 3 pillars. This is how you can begin to map your own assumptions as you do your business. So let's take a look at desirability. It tests whether or not our innovation is right the right solution for our customer's problem? Can we create desirability? Do we understand what people want? Do we understand what problems they're trying to solve? Do we understand their outcomes, not outputs? Let's split that, break that notion in half. Outputs and outcomes. Outcomes, I want to go to California. Outputs, I'm driving 55 miles an hour, right? Making sure you're solving the right problem. Viability. Do we have the value chain to create long-term sustainability? That's where we get, does our acquisition, does our build, the cost of building out way less than the actual value that we extract? Can we build a repeatable customer base? Where will the money come from? How do we generate cash? Viability. And then finally, feasibility. Do we have the chops to build what we say that we can? Can we actually do it? Can our feasibility feed our desirability to show whether or not it is viable to do it? Well, let's look at what happens when you have those things not all considered. If you have a desirability and a feasibility, but there's no viability, it's a great idea, but it ain't going to succeed. There's just no way that we can manage it. It doesn't have any sustainable legs, which means that your great idea, if you can't prove sustainability, if you can't demonstrate that people will continue to buy it and extract value and give us money to build what they're looking for, great idea. Stop it. Well, what happens if we have desirable and viable, but no feasibility? We have people who want it. We have the money to do it, but there ain't no way we can do it. There is no technical solution for what people want and what we can afford. What people want and what we can afford. And then finally, if you have feasibility and viability, we have, but no desirability. Feasible, viable, and no desirable. We have a great project that nobody wants. This is where hobby shops. This is when R&D gets a bad name. This is when inventions get a bad name. Oh, great. Nobody wants a left-handed wind shifter. But it's a good idea. Yeah, wonderful, right? Can't do it. Doesn't matter. Oh, and by the way, that's the one that you want to prove first. If you don't do anything else, you want to make sure that you're building stuff that people want, because there's nothing worse than building things that nobody wants in the innovation space. As a matter of fact, it's an anathema to developing innovation, because that's not what innovation is by definition. And so if you have a consideration for all three, you have something that's buildable and sustainable. Pillars of innovation. So you can do this and you can map your own business. You can map a business for this to make sure that you're acquiring feasible, viable, and desirable. Those of you that know this Christian tradition story, this is the Tower of Babel. And the story goes that these people got together to build something. They had a base understanding of what they were trying to build, but as they got closer and closer to the heavens, God came down and said, no, too close. We're going to strike you down and have different conversations. They were babbling. As a matter of fact, I'm sure some of you have sat in a meeting and all you heard was blah, blah, blah. What are they talking about? What did she say? What's he talking about? But what if we had a way? Come on. Oops, sorry. What if we had a way to put our ideas together? What if we had a way to say, I now have a tool. I now have a tool that is useful, that so when we get together and have a conversation, the tool known as a business model, we go from blah, blah, blah to, oh. As a matter of fact, I've been playing with this idea since 2010 under Miss Long. And the organization I was in, I offered it up and we went and played with it. They presented it to her. This was 2011. I think I just looked at not too long ago, I looked at the very first time I played with this model. When they presented to her, she was like, why don't we do this all the time? What's powerful about it, it's allowing us a space to put our ideas together. So what is a business model? It is the way that you create, capture, and deliver value. Use a very direct succinct idea about how do we create value, how do we capture value, and how do we deliver value. Unlike a business plan, well, and by the way, if you were to Google business model and business plan, business models in Google in terms word searches are huge. I mean, you'll get all kinds. Business plans in terms of word searches are getting smaller and smaller. As a matter of fact, they're teaching in business B schools, Stanford, all the other good B schools, Wharton, all of those, NYU, Stern School, they're using less of the business plan and more of the business model. How do we go about creating, capturing, delivering value? Now, what does a business model allow us to demonstrate? Remember, feasible, viable, desirable. Every organization has a set of costs. Every organization. And you at least in your break even, federal government, want to have your X dollars of cost meet your X dollars of mission in terms of our commercial friends, commercial sector friends, in terms of profit, a 1-to-1. But that's not sustainable. That's not scalable. And so you need to be planful about this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the business model canvas. There are 9 sections to the canvas. Customers. Who are your customers? What pains do they have? Customer relationship. How do you get, keep, and grow those customers? Value proposition. What am I offering to those customers who have pain to help them relieve those pains? Distribution. How am I getting my offer to those people? On the back end, you have key partners, key activities, key resources, key partners. Who are they, those people that help you build the things that economically it doesn't make sense for you to do? Your key resources. What are the core material that you need to get your value proposition aligned to your customers? Key activities. What are the things that you or somebody else have to do but must be done to make your value proposition work? And along the bottom, how much does all that stuff in the back end cost? And then how do you make that smaller relative to the amount of revenue or value or mission value that you are creating? There is one for the mission, something called a mission model canvas. I'm not going to talk about it here, but this is the business model canvas. And so I'm going to walk you through how to understand this. A business model canvas. These are coffee beans, cheap, as a unit of commodity, less than fractions of a cent. But a question that we always ask, because it's just a wonderful example. In terms of percent, more or less, did the Swiss pay for a gram of coffee consumed at home? That's important, consumed at home in 2010 than compared to 2000. This is demonstrative. It's changed, but it is demonstrative. And I'm sure you're trying to guess. Well, here's the answer. 600 to 800% more. You talk about a scalable business. Oh, and you know that guy, Jerry Clooney, and you may have seen some of his advertisements that are out there because he is the Nespresso guy. Now, I've had a barista in class who said, oh, yeah, if you want something that is close to what you would get in a high-end coffee bar store but want to do it at home, Nespresso is it. As a matter of fact, Nespresso changed the coffee business model. They went and did an innovation, not an invention, an innovation in how coffee businesses work. Because what they did is they figured out how to keep, capture, and deliver value in terms of these little things. Now, the epilogue to this, fast forward to 2015, I believe, or 2016, when their patent went dry, they had to shift their business model. Part of which was exclusivity. But if you live in Northern Virginia, you know that you can go to Tyson's Corner Mall and there's an espresso shop. That is completely unusual. They had to change they had to innovate even in their business model. So what was the results in 2000? They had a per annum growth of 30% year over year for 10 years, for a decade, 30% growth. They had a global business sales, and that's just one of their the Nestle group, just one of their things. You know, I remember as a kid, the Nestle chocolate, chocolate and strawberry, they were a food group. Just one of them created a $3.8 billion global sales because they thought about their business model. This is why I said this is powerful, because this is the business of Nespresso in one sheet. Customers at home and in the office. The way the relationship, you belong to a club. because they were going to give you the value proposition, the powerful aroma, the emotional experience of going out to your local espresso bar in your house. How did they get it to you? Through the outlet, Nespresso.com. Oh, and by the way, back in the day, they were only in 2 cities in the United States. I'm sorry, 3, Chicago, New York, and LA. Now they're kind of all over the place. In Europe, very different. The back end activities, they had patents, they had marketing, they had manufacturing. Key resources they need: somebody do the advertisement. I'm sorry, in the activities. It's not the marketing. It's a key activity of making sure that you were part of the club that pull you back in, which is the relationship part. Key resources: distribution, manufacturing, advertising. This is where it's important. Strategic partners. Remember, we talked about the strategic partners help to lower costs. They are a food group. They are not a manufacturer of coffee machines. What they did do is find the partners that were the best at it. They went to the Italians that have espresso bars and knew it. They said, we need something like this. We will partner with you to help lower across the bottom our cost of distribution, our cost of manufacturing, our cost of advertisement, because we don't worry about money off of the machines. We want money off the pods. That's how they shifted it. That's how they altered, innovated around their business model. Here's another example: McDonald's. How many of you know that McDonald's is not a food company? McDonald's is a real estate company. They own the real estate. Look at the bottom right where it says revenue. They make no money off the food, well, relatively no money, but they make a whole lot of money off the land. One of the biggest real estate holders in the world, they and Walmart. And so the question is, you can have that kind of cost. You can have that kind of profit, but how do you go and 10x it? Google specifically calls out 10xing in their world. It is a 10x experience. How do they go about doing that? Everything that they do, they are looking for a 10x return on every business that they start. If it does not have a 10x return, now, some of your businesses may not have 10x, but we would offer up that you are looking to how to 10x. Because if you make 1 sale, your next 10x is to make 10 sales, right? Didn't say make 1,000 scales. You're not looking to scale it immediately. You want to make sales in 10x increments, 10 times your business. And so remember, we talk about feasible, viable, desirable. What you're trying to do and use this thing is to understand the desirability. And you do that through customer discovery. To understand feasibility, do you buy, borrow, or build? And then viability, you want more profit than related cost. That's what you're trying to do. This is what the power of a business model canvas can give for you, because now you don't have to go actually and build a thing, but you can test this in your office with your colleagues on your team to see whether or not you're doing the right thing. Oh, and by the way, when you do this, understand that every single thing that you would put in here is a hypothesis unless and until it's been tested and you have data. Make data-driven decisions. That's how you narrow the squiggly line. Because you need to figure out where your core is, where you're adjacent, and your transformational opportunities are. Because then you can start to make strategic choices in your business model about where to play and how to win. What's really important is, as you do this idea of exploration, of finding your new businesses, you have to have 2 ways of thinking about this. You have to be able to both explore your business models and exploit a business model. So those of you that are on the call right now that are business people, you have core, exploitation, but what you're trying to do is develop an exploratory opportunity where you're testing and designing at the same time. This is where it becomes really important to understand how do you do that as cheaply and quickly as possible. If you go all the way down to the bottom left, low expected return, high innovation risk, guess what? Don't spend any money. Don't spend money. It's not worth it until you can prove that you're moving in the right direction, until you take that squiggly line and you narrow it out. And so if you go to the top right, that's the same thing as the squiggly line when it starts to flatten out. Now you're ready to exploit. Oh, and by the way, just one more thing. Your transformation, top right, if you do it right, will then become your core, which means that you are now open up for more transformational opportunity. COVID-19, the acceleration of technology, the uncertainty of the market. If you're in the government space or you're consulting or getting money to the consulting to or working with the government space, uncertain actors. Transformation then becomes core, which allows you to open more space. And so you can go and play with your currency of your model. You have things that you actually do, but as you learn more and more information, you're now in a space where you can start to think, how do I rethink my service project to reach that new customer segment? How do I create recurring revenue? How do I address my cost of services? How do I get different customers by making sure my activities are thought out? You can utilize this canvas to rethink and innovate around your business. Last one. Einstein said innovation is not a product of logical thought, even though the final product is tied to a logical structure. The experimentation, the understanding, it really is, it might feel uncertain, not logical thought, but at the end, with that, as you narrow it down, because the ideas that got you here ain't going to get you there. So that's who I am. My organization is called GoWin, a highly specialized innovation consultancy. We're dedicated to accelerating innovation at the speed of your mission. It's my number, my email. I thank you all. Are there any questions?
Hey there, Tyrome. Thank you for joining us and doing this for us. I have been watching the chat channels, and we do have a couple questions from the audience. So let me start with the first one. This is from Pat. What can we do to shift or adjust the federal budget cycle to allow us to develop and grow programs or capabilities incrementally without having a constant set of adjustments or replans?
So it's interesting. I wish my partner was here. That's the engineer guy. He likes the FAR. He actually read the FAR. I know it's like this thick, and no, there ain't no way I'm going to do that. But what he would say is that the adjustments are there. The FAR allows you to do those acquisitions. OTAs, I know, are one of those things that are out there. I just know the other transactional relationships or authorities, other transactional authorities. I know those are out there. But even the FAR and by the way, the DFAR are set up that will allow you to create the plans, but spend differently. I had a senior one time, and the colleague, the person who invited me or encouraged me to do this, Mike G, said, "Why do we build everything as if we're building battleships?" And so the FAR and the DFAR, not an expert, I know through my colleague who's our resident expert on my team, would suggest that you can actually do it even within the regulations as they exist now. Sorry that I'm not an acquisition guy.
No problem. I think we're getting an array of questions because I think what you've just presented applies to just a wide swath of different areas, not just business. Obviously, government organizations, as you've hinted out throughout the presentation. So here's another one. This one is by Mandy Pearson. When midway through the research project, but someone decides the value and desirability aren't there, is it worth fighting to keep going? It's painful to stop or even slow the science and hard work.
So one of the things that we do know is that it's okay that if you have a culture where failure and the data would tell you to stop, and you have a cultural reality that allows you to stop it. Don't do it. But not all of us have it. Not all of us have the capacity to say, you know what, this ain't working anymore. We're in for a penny, in for a pound. There is in economics this idea of the sunk cost fallacy. My daddy used to say, in for a penny, in for a pound. And the sunk cost fallacy is, well, I've already thrown a couple of $1 million at it. It's not going to work. But I've already thrown a couple of $1 million at it. Stop it. I would say that the courageous organization that was really about innovation, that is really about the customer. And I like what you had to say, Mandy, about desirability, that is what you're testing against. You're not testing against whether or not the tech works, because you could build the right thing and nobody accepts it. At what point are you wasting money? Right? You're now wasting money. It is okay to say no. Oh, and by the way, if you've ever had the Amazon, an example of it, the Amazon phone, the Fire phone became the Amazon Alexa. I got two of them in my house, right? They knew at some point, nobody wants this. Stop. But it allowed them to develop new technology. And so what you can do in the business model is you can plan for that, or you can see what the data would tell you, not plan, what the data is telling you. You can start to say, okay, this didn't work. What else have we learned to figure out a new problem, a new job to be done of the customers?
Awesome. Great response there, and great questions as they're coming in here. The next one here is, how can very small teams work together to cover all aspects of the business model?
Oh my God, those are the best teams to have. Just did a course at NGA. I'm on a team called the Fast Forward team, which is basically a lean startup team. And the course we did was minimal viable meetings, where we had this idea coming out of Harvard: 8, 18, 1800. 8, if you're trying to make a real decision. 1800. 8. The 18 was if you need to get some consensus. 1800 if you're going to just rally the troops. At Amazon, they have the 2 pizza rule. You can't have any more people than what would feed 2 pizzas. And so the smaller the team, there is and I know that in the communication world, there's n squared plus n plus 1 or something like that, a number of connections. So that small team can now get out and do the work that a larger team could not do, because the numbers of connections. But what you have to be on that small team is absolutely clear about the task that you're about to embark on. And so you can solve one thing at a time and address that. If so, any of you and my Agile friends out there, create a Kanban board. And what you do is you figure out the most critical thing that you have to solve. Remember the Jenga block? Your small team is absolutely could be designed to address the most critical thing versus everybody running off and doing whatever they're going to do.
Great. So the next question is, how do uncertain times, such as we have during the current crisis, affect innovation? And you answered a little bit of this during your presentation. I don't want to take it too far back, but on the other hand, go for it. Yeah, I think this is an excellent question.
Yeah, it all depends on how scared you are, right? Because there is an emotional component to this. There is a woman out of Harvard. Her name is her name is Amy Edmondson, Dr. Amy Edmondson, and she talks about psychological safety. Truly psychologically safe organizations say, you know what? We've never been here before. We don't know what's going to work. But what we do want to do is we want to be prepared to address what could work. Psychologically safe organizations allow people to speak up, to feel like retribution is not going to be there. Psychologically unsafe organizations in like stressful times like we're in now, particularly for innovative teams, are going to be the ones that will, for instance, the Challenger disaster. That was a psychologically unsafe environment, right? This has been studied. This is nothing new. You can go back and look at the science, the studies, the research. Those engineers knew that those O-rings past 32 degrees Fahrenheit would crack. They could not work. But they got the pressure to say, oh, and by the way, shut up and color, that thing is launching, because we have the pressure. They could not speak. Amy did some work on what happened in medical surgical teams. Very personal, right? If you've ever had surgery, you have a doc, you have the anesthesiologist, and most times you have a nurse anesthetist. In a psychologically safe organization, med surg team, the nurse anesthetist could say to the anesthesiologist, Doc, I'm speaking up because I have a task to do. You continue to give the oxygen, you're going to damage, you're going to harm the patient. The doc goes, yeah, oh, thank you. As opposed to psychologically unsafe organizations, right? That the nurse would say, I'm not saying a word because they're not biting my head off, regardless of what the task is. And so your question, regardless, in a psychologically safe organization, innovation is allowed. It actually is what fosters more innovation. In a psychologically unsafe organization, people retrench. They pull back their resources, both physical, financial, and emotional resources. They can't become a part of the team. And so I would say that psychological safety is a key component to making sure that innovation happens, even in uncertain, especially in uncertain times like this.
So that's all for the questions at the moment. However, just to give another minute or two for folks to pipe in, I want to kind of take it to more conversation real quick. There's several things that when I was listening to the presentation that I kind of resonated with me, especially in the beginning as you're talking about understanding job requirements and building towards the problem, not the tool.
Yes.
That's a strong one. As a lot of innovations and emerging technologies are out there, we don't want to see the same technology all the time reskinned. Does it actually solve the problem of the customer? Is it actually changing something from their point of view? And then from a customer requirement standpoint, I personally see that as something that I'm helping businesses constantly try to understand. It's not always the tool that resonates with these users. It's actually their approach, to making their workflows easier, or just drastically changing the mission, which is a single tweak that they don't even realize how much time it saved from the user perspective.
Yeah. We had there's an entrepreneur that I collaborate with, and he's been doing it for a long time. He was with like Pearson Consulting for a while, and he helped them rethink their product life cycle. Asked him, so as an engineer, as an entrepreneur and a person who is consulting to these kind of innovation teams, he said, what's the first thing that you suggest them to do after they come up with that idea? He said, go talk to 100 people. Just go out and have a conversation with 100 customers. Don't build a damn thing, because once you do that, you are stuck. It is a sucking chest wound of activity, right? And so having the conversation, to your point, Adam, that if I can say, back away from it, I had an idea, let's go validate it. And the only way that you can validate it, there's a guy by the name of Steve Blank, who is a serial entrepreneur, who is the godfather of the lean startup movement. He said, get out of the building. For us, it might not be getting out of it. It might, if you're at NGA, it's like go from the second floor of the third floor to the fifth floor. Go have a conversation with somebody. You want to validate that your idea has desirability, which is the very first thing that you must prove out. Is it desirable, then feasible, then viable, right? Desirability is absolutely core to making sure you're building the right thing. That even though they say this is my requirement, one of the things that we say when we do consultation is to do what? That's a requirement. TDW. To do what, right? Yeah, TDW. To do what? I can make sure my acronym was correct. What are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? Well, somebody's already doing that. Well, I got my own money. Oh, so that's the problem you're trying to solve. You're trying to spend cash. That's your real requirement? Well, I can't help you with that. Right? If that's your requirement, great. But if you have something, I can't get or I wish somebody would, or every time now we're solving the problem. So that's how we kind of consult to the requirements thing.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like we're having more questions in, but okay. I wanted to present you with one last one. Is just because we have a lot of folks attending the Geospatial Frontier Virtual Technology Fair as a lot of military individuals. I think they're trying to understand what the industry is like, what technologies are available. But I know many of those military professionals are looking to explore what their career opportunities are on the outside and where to apply or when to apply the best practices and the stuff that you just talked about in this presentation. At what point in their career should they think about it? It's not all about just innovation on product services, on designing and building companies, but in my perspective, this applies to all aspects of what you do in life, not just with a small team, but even in what you do personally too, correct?
So it's funny because one of my teammates, the guys on my team, he talks about, I've been doing lean startup with my kid. That's how I raised my child, doing agile work with my child, doing retrospects and doing a scrum. Every morning we do a scrum. And so it's funny that he uses the language of scrum and agile and design thinking. And he is one of his superpowers is design thinking. And so doing that, it's so funny to hear you say that because it's exactly how he talks about it. There is this whole idea of a business model. When I do this with young people, I say, you are your own business. Jay-Z said, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. And so for him, it really came down to, and one way to think about it, that business model canvas, who do you need on your team? Who do you need to partner with? What things do you need in resources? How do you know you're creating value? How are you reaching out to people that says your customer? the people that are going to support you. What do you have to offer the world? And so it's one way for those men and women that are leaving the service to start to think of themselves not as an employee, right, but as a business that is offering a service to another business, and to design their business. Just a thought.
No, it makes sense, and I just want them to leave them with that. It's a big world out there, but there's a lot to think about going forward, and but there's a lot of resources, just as what you are a resource helping others out, and I want to share those best practices with everybody who's attending this event. So yes, once again, I want to thank you for giving this presentation and helping us at least springboard in thinking about the business model canvas and this type of perspective and more of an innovative approach.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next week. This is the last presentation scheduled for our first week in the conference. And we have many more that are going to be added to the schedule over the weekend. So, that's the end of it.